the Vatican Secret Archives. You're standing in a hallway that stretches beyond sight. The air tastes of parchment and centuries. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting sterile light on metal shelving that disappears into darkness. 53 miles of documents surround you. Letters that could topple governments. Trial records that name names. Correspondence between popes and kings that official history claims never existed. You reach for a folder marked 1612. Your hand stops. The Swiss guard behind you shifts his weight. Some knowledge, it seems, is too dangerous for the world to possess. The Archivum Secretum Vaticanum was formally established in 1612 by Pope Paul V, though the Church had been sealing sensitive documents for centuries before that date. In 1981, Pope John Paul II opened limited sections to qualified researchers, but strict protocols remain. Scholars like Professor Sergio Pagano, the current prefect, oversee access to roughly 40,000 documents per year from a collection estimated at over 12 million items. Dr. Barbara Frail of the Vatican School of Paleography published findings in 2007 revealing that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Knights Templar in 1308, 3 years before their official dissolution. Her research, drawn from Processus contra Templarios, had been sealed for 700 years. The archives contain 85,000 volumes across 53 linear miles of shelving, temperature controlled at 18 degrees Celsius, humidity maintained at 55%. Documents span from the 8th century to the present day. The Borgia apartments hold Alexander VI's personal correspondence. The Fondo Borghese contains trial records from the Roman Inquisition. The Segreteria di Stato preserves diplomatic exchanges that shaped European politics for 8 centuries. Cardinal José Tolentino, Calasa de Mendonça, Vatican archivist and librarian, controls access through a committee that reviews fewer than 100 applications annually from the world's leading historians. Here's what makes this impossible. The Catholic Church has maintained unbroken institutional control over these documents longer than most nations have existed. While empires rose and fell, while libraries burned and archives were scattered, the Vatican preserved correspondence that could fundamentally alter our understanding of medieval politics, the Crusades, and the relationship between church and state. The Inquisition records alone document trials that official histories claim were limited in scope. The diplomatic archives contain letters between popes and rulers that contradict established timelines of major historical events. The mainstream explanation is institutional preservation. The Church argues these documents were sealed to protect diplomatic confidentiality, personal privacy of historical figures, and to prevent misinterpretation of complex theological debates. Vatican officials maintain that gradual release through scholarly research serves historical accuracy better than wholesale publication. The archives represent standard ecclesiastical record-keeping expanded over centuries, with restrictions lifted as documents lose political sensitivity. But the selective release raises questions the Vatican won't address. Dr. Frale's Templar research emerged only after 7 centuries of concealment. What other verdicts of innocence remain buried? The Inquisition archives opened partially in 1998, yet researchers report significant gaps in the trial records. Documents from the pontificate of Pope Pius XII during World War II remain largely sealed despite his death in 1958. Professor David Kurtzer of Brown University, whose research in the archives earned him the 2019 Pulitzer Prize, notes that access remains deliberately limited to materials the Church deems historically safe. The Church controls the narrative of its own history. What correspondence between Renaissance popes and European monarchs contradicts the official record? Which Inquisition trials documented evidence that would exonerate the accused? How many diplomatic agreements shaped medieval politics while remaining hidden from the historical record? What truths require 4 centuries of silence to protect? How different would our understanding of European history be if these 53 miles of documents were fully accessible? Which documents will never see the light of day because they're too dangerous for the modern world to know? But the Vatican's walls aren't the only barriers governments have erected around forbidden knowledge. Area 51 Groom Lake Facility. You're driving north on State Route 375 through the Nevada desert at 2 in the morning, July 15th, 1996. The headlights cut through absolute darkness. No streetlights, no houses, just scrub brush and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then you see them. White trucks, government plates, blocking the road ahead. Men in desert camouflage stepping into your headlight beams. One raises his hand. You stop. The engine ticks in the cooling night air. Behind them, barely visible in the moonlight, stretches a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Signs every 50 feet. Restricted area. Use of deadly force authorized. Photography prohibited. Beyond that fence lies 154 square miles of the most heavily guarded real estate in America. A place that officially did not exist until 2013. A place where the United States government has been conducting classified operations for nearly 70 years under a veil of complete secrecy. The Groom Lake facility was established in 1955 by the Central Intelligence Agency in partnership with Lockheed Corporation. Kelly Johnson, Lockheed's chief engineer and designer of the P-80 Shooting Star, selected the remote dry lakebed for testing the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. The site offered perfect conditions. A natural runway stretching for miles, complete isolation, and existing restricted airspace from nuclear weapons testing at the nearby Nevada test site. Brigadier General Osmond Ritlin oversaw the initial construction, transforming the empty desert into a functioning airbase in less than 8 months. By 1962, the facility had expanded to test the A-12 Oxcart program, predecessor to the SR-71 Blackbird. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, successive classified aircraft programs moved through Groom Lake, the Have Blue stealth demonstrator, the Phone 117 Nighthawk, projects with code names like Senior Trend and Aurora, each program more classified than the last, each requiring deeper levels of security clearance and more restrictive operational protocols. The perimeter expanded systematically. In 1984, the Air Force seized an additional 89,000 acres of public land, pushing the restricted zone boundary back to the ridgelines surrounding the valley. Security contractors from EG and G Special Projects, later AECOM, established mobile patrols across the perimeter, motion sensors buried in the desert floor, infrared cameras mounted on every high point, armed guards with authorization to use lethal force against intruders. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. Area 51 serves as a testing ground for experimental military aircraft. The extreme security measures protect classified aviation technology and operational methods from foreign intelligence services. The government's decades-long policy of non-acknowledgement was standard procedure for protecting national security assets during the Cold War and beyond. When the CIA finally declassified the facility's existence in 2013, it confirmed what aviation experts had long suspected. Groom Lake was simply America's primary site for testing advanced aircraft away from public scrutiny. But the security measures go far beyond what any conventional aircraft testing would require. The facility maintains a no-fly zone extending from ground level to unlimited altitude restrictions typically reserved for the most sensitive nuclear installations. Commercial airline flights are rerouted around the entire area, creating a permanent gap in one of America's busiest air corridors. The perimeter security budget, according to partially declassified Defense Department documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests by researcher Peter Merlin in 2006, exceeds the operating costs of most military bases with far larger personnel complements. Some researchers suggest the facility's true purpose extends beyond aircraft testing into more exotic territory. The extreme security protocols match those used for biological weapons research or advanced propulsion experiments using classified physics. The consistent reports from former employees, despite strict non-disclosure agreements, describe underground facilities extending multiple levels beneath the desert floor. Janet flights unmarked. Boeing 737s that transport workers daily from Las Vegas carry hundreds more passengers than any known aircraft testing program would require. The government's admission in 2013 raised more questions than it answered. Why maintain such extraordinary security for conventional aircraft testing? Why the decades of official denial when similar facilities like Edwards Air Force Base operate with standard military classification levels? Why continue expanding the restricted zone even after the Cold War ended? What exactly requires protection by lethal force in that Nevada desert? What projects justify security measures exceeding those of nuclear weapons facilities? How many levels of classification exist beyond what the 2013 disclosure revealed? The pattern of government secrecy extends far beyond American borders, reaching back through centuries of deliberately hidden locations that powerful institutions refuse to acknowledge or explain. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang. You step into the archaeological survey tent outside Xi'an, China, in March of 2023. The ground-penetrating radar screen shows something impossible. Beneath your feet, 38 meters down, mercury flows in geometric patterns that match rivers described in texts written over 2,000 years ago. The readings spike to toxic levels that would kill a human in minutes. You're standing above the most dangerous archaeological site on Earth, and the Chinese government has no intention of letting anyone inside. Dr. Zhang Weixing of the Institute of Remote Sensing and Digital Earth published his findings in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2024. His team's soil samples, taken from 41 boreholes around the burial mound, revealed mercury concentrations of 1,440 parts per million. Normal soil contains 0.2 parts per million. The tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, is a death trap that has remained sealed since 210 before the Common Era. The tomb complex spans 56 square kilometers. The burial mound itself rises 76 meters above the surrounding plain. Ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian, writing in the records of the Grand Historian around 100 before the Common Era, described rivers of mercury mechanically flowing around a bronze representation of the empire. He wrote of crossbows rigged to fire automatically at intruders, and a ceiling studded with pearls to represent stars. Archaeological surveys confirm every detail. Ground-penetrating radar, conducted by the Jiangsu Provincial Institute of Archaeology in 2011, revealed the tomb's internal structure matches Sima Qian's description exactly. The burial chamber sits at the complex's center, surrounded by 4 walls. Magnetic anomaly surveys detect massive bronze objects in precise formations. Seismic imaging shows hollow spaces consistent with underground palaces. The emperor's body lies somewhere within this labyrinth, protected by mercury vapor and mechanical weapons that may still function after 2 millennia. The mainstream explanation for the government's excavation ban centers on preservation ethics. Officials argue that current archaeological techniques cannot safely handle the mercury contamination. They cite the need to develop better preservation methods before risking the tomb's contents. The State Administration of Cultural Heritage maintains that excavation would destroy invaluable artifacts through exposure to modern contamination and handling. But the ban extends beyond scientific caution. Internal government documents leaked in 2019 reveal concerns about what the tomb might contain. Qin Shi Huang was obsessed with immortality, consuming mercury-based elixirs he believed would grant eternal life. His tomb was designed as a functioning miniature universe where his reign could continue forever. Some researchers suggest the Chinese government fears discovering technologies or knowledge that would challenge established historical narratives about ancient Chinese civilization. The emperor unified China through unprecedented technological and organizational innovations. His armies used standardized weapons, crossbows with bronze triggers accurate to within millimeters, and communication systems that enabled coordinated attacks across thousands of kilometers. The Terracotta Army discovered nearby in 1974 shows manufacturing precision that rivals modern industrial processes. Each warrior's face is individually sculpted, their armor detailed to specific military ranks and regional variations. Dr. Kristen Romay, archaeological correspondent for National Geographic, documented her attempts to gain excavation permits in 2022. Government officials told her the tomb would not be opened within this generation or the next. When pressed for scientific justification, they cited public safety concerns about mercury exposure. But they also mentioned cultural sensitivities and matters of national importance that cannot be discussed publicly. The mercury rivers still flow. Sensors detect their movement patterns changing with seasonal temperature variations, suggesting the mechanical systems that power them remain functional. The crossbows wait in darkness, their bronze triggers ready after 23 centuries. Whatever Qin Shi Huang took with him into eternity continues to guard its secrets behind walls of poison vapor and automated death. What knowledge did China's first emperor consider too dangerous for the living world? Why does a government that regularly excavates other ancient sites refuse to touch this one tomb? What could be worth protecting with rivers of mercury and mechanical weapons that outlasted the empire they were built to serve? If the tomb contains only burial goods and a corpse, why maintain a ban that has lasted longer than most civilizations? What lies beneath Xi'an that 23 centuries of Chinese rulers have agreed must never see daylight? The pattern of government-sealed sites extends beyond China's borders to places where isolation serves as the ultimate protection. Snake Island, Brazil. You feel the helicopter blades cutting through humid Atlantic air, 20 miles off the Sao Paulo coast. The pilot refuses to land. Below, dense rainforest canopy covers 33 hectares of forbidden ground. Your radio crackles. Negative on landing request. Brazilian Navy, standing order. No civilian access. The island looks peaceful from this height. Pristine. Untouched. What you cannot see from here is why the Brazilian government has sealed this place for over 100 years. What moves beneath that canopy at a density that defies biological logic. The official designation came in 1920. Admiral João Batista das Neves classified Ilha da Queimada Grande as a restricted biological preserve under Navy jurisdiction. Dr. Vital Brazil, director of the Butantan Institute, had submitted his preliminary survey report to the Brazilian Ministry of Health that same year. His findings were unambiguous. The highest concentration of venomous snakes per square meter documented anywhere on Earth. The golden lancehead viper, Bothrops insularis, exists nowhere else. Population density: 5 snakes per square meter across the entire island. Dr. Marcelo Duarte of the Butantan Institute published his comprehensive population study in the Journal of Venomous Animals and Toxins in 2002. His team, working under strict Navy escort and limited to 48-hour research windows, documented over 4,000 individual specimens. The venom potency tests revealed something unprecedented. Bothrops insularis venom is 3 to 5 times more lethal than its mainland relatives. Dr. Ricardo Breitz, lead toxicologist on the project, measured hemotoxic activity that liquefies human tissue within minutes. No antivenom exists. No treatment protocol has proven effective. The mainstream explanation centers on evolutionary isolation. When rising sea levels separated the island 11,000 years ago, the snake population adapted to hunt migratory birds. Without ground prey, natural selection favored increasingly potent venom. The population exploded in the absence of natural predators. Standard evolutionary biology. Textbook island biogeography principles proposed by Robert MacArthur and Edward Wilson in 1967. But the mathematics reveal an impossibility. Dr. Sarah Williams of Oxford University's Department of Zoology calculated the carrying capacity for the island ecosystem in her 2015 Nature Conservation Study. The biomass of 4,000 vipers requires prey availability that the island cannot support. Migratory bird populations tracked by the Brazilian Ornithological Society show seasonal variations that should trigger massive die-offs. Yet, the snake population remains stable, constant, as if sustained by resources that do not exist. The naval records contain references to earlier inhabitants. Lighthouse keeper Manuel de Souza and his family operated the automated beacon from 1890 to 1920. His final logbook entry, archived at the Maritime Museum in Rio de Janeiro, describes increasing serpent activity around the lighthouse grounds. The family's fate remains officially undocumented. The lighthouse was found abandoned. 3 skeletons were discovered in the keeper's quarters. No cause of death was recorded. The Navy decommissioned the station immediately. Dr. Giuseppe Porto's unpublished manuscript, held in the Butantan Institute's restricted archives, describes anomalous behavioral patterns observed during the 1998 expedition. The snakes exhibit coordinated movement unprecedented in serpent species. They respond to human presence from distances that exceed their natural sensory capabilities. Thermal imaging reveals gathering patterns that suggest collective intelligence. These observations were excluded from the official expedition report at Navy request. Recent satellite thermal imaging conducted by the Brazilian Space Research Institute shows heat signatures concentrated in the island's interior. Dr. Amanda Silva's classified analysis identified structures beneath the canopy that do not match natural geological formations. Ground-penetrating radar scans reveal hollow spaces and regular geometric patterns. The Navy has denied all requests for archaeological investigation. No explanation has been provided for these subsurface anomalies. Why does the Brazilian government maintain absolute prohibition on an island supposedly containing only snakes? What explains the survival of 4,000 apex predators in an ecosystem that cannot support them? How do serpents demonstrate behavioral coordination that exceeds their neurological capacity? What lies beneath the forest canopy that thermal imaging cannot fully resolve? Why have the detailed findings of multiple scientific expeditions been classified by naval intelligence? But some secrets are buried deeper than others can ever hope to reach. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault. The steel door weighs 400 kilograms. You're standing in minus 18 degrees Celsius. Your breath forming ice crystals that fall like snow in the LED lights. The concrete tunnel stretches 130 meters into the Arctic mountain. Your footsteps echo against walls designed to withstand nuclear war. You pass the first checkpoint, then the second. Each door requires multiple keys, multiple authorizations, multiple people who cannot act alone. The final chamber contains over 1 million seed samples. But here's what they don't tell you on the guided tours. There are sections even the contributing nations cannot access. Compartments that require unanimous consent from all participating governments to open. Seeds locked away not just from catastrophe, but from the very countries that deposited them. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened on February 26, 2008, carved into a sandstone mountain on the Norwegian archipelago of Spitsbergen. The facility operates under the oversight of the Norwegian Ministry of Agriculture and Food, with funding from the Crop Trust and operational management by Nordgen. Dr. Carrie Fowler, former executive director of the Crop Trust, designed the vault's protocols alongside Norwegian authorities. The structure extends 120 meters into permafrost that has remained frozen for hundreds of thousands of years. The vault maintains a temperature of minus 18 degrees Celsius through both artificial cooling and natural permafrost, with backup systems designed to preserve seeds for centuries, even without human intervention. The documented security protocols reveal an institution more complex than its public mission suggests. Access requires authorization from multiple international bodies. The Norwegian government controls the facility, but depositing nations retain ownership of their genetic material. Each seed collection sits in specialized containers within 3 separate storage halls. The entrance features artwork by Norwegian artist Viveke Sane, but past the public areas, the vault operates under classification levels that restrict access even among participating scientists. Dr. Marie Haga, former executive director of the Crop Trust, published detailed operational guidelines in 2015, yet significant portions of the facility's protocols remain classified under Norwegian state security laws. The mainstream explanation presents the vault as humanity's agricultural insurance policy. Climate change threatens crop diversity worldwide. Political instability endangers seed banks in developing nations. The Svalbard facility provides a fail-safe repository where genetic material can survive global catastrophe. The extreme Arctic location, stable permafrost, and multiple redundant security systems create the ideal environment for long-term preservation. International cooperation ensures that no single nation controls humanity's agricultural heritage. The restricted access prevents contamination and maintains optimal storage conditions for centuries. But the classification levels extend far beyond agricultural preservation. Some seed collections require unanimous consent from all participating nations before access is granted, even to the depositing country. Norwegian security protocols classify entire sections of the facility under state secrecy laws typically reserved for military installations. The vault's computer systems operate on networks isolated from internet access, with data transfers requiring physical authorization from multiple officials. Former employees, bound by non-disclosure agreements, describe storage areas that contain materials beyond agricultural seeds. Dr. Fowler himself acknowledged in a 2019 interview that certain vault operations remain necessarily opaque for security reasons he could not specify. The seeds themselves tell a story of selective preservation. Major agricultural corporations maintain private collections within the facility, with access restricted even from the scientific institutions that develop the genetic material. Indigenous seed varieties from politically sensitive regions disappear into classified storage protocols. The vault's annual reports, published by Nordgen, account for roughly 85% of the facility's storage capacity. The remaining 15% operates under protocols that treat genetic material as state security assets, rather than scientific resources. Why does agricultural preservation require military-grade secrecy? What exactly fills those unanimously restricted compartments? Which seeds are too dangerous for their own creators to access? Who decides which genetic material threatens global stability? What kind of agricultural catastrophe requires preparation this classified? The Arctic preserves more than seeds in its frozen vaults, and some doors remain locked even to those who built the keys. Moscow Metro 2. You feel the rumble beneath your feet as the official metro train pulls away from Sokolnicheskaya station. It's 1937. You're standing on the platform, but something's wrong. The vibration doesn't match the train that just left. There's another tremor, deeper, running parallel to the tracks above. The station master catches your questioning look and turns away too quickly. In Stalin's Moscow, some questions are better left unasked. The existence of Moscow's second subway system was confirmed through declassified KGB documents released by former intelligence officer Oleg Gordievsky in his 1991 memoir, Next Stop Execution. The system, codenamed Metro 2 or D6 by Western intelligence agencies, was first referenced in Soviet construction records dating to 1935. According to Gordievsky's testimony before the British Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, the parallel network spans over 200 kilometers beneath Moscow, connecting the Kremlin to key government installations across the city. Dr. Joseph Bermudez, senior analyst at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, documented construction evidence in his 2003 report, Moscow's Underground Command Networks. Bermudez identified 17 separate construction contracts issued between 1935 and 1957, all classified under the innocuous designation Special Metropolitan Construction Project No. 6. The contracts, discovered in partially declassified Ministry of Defense archives, called for tunnels bored 50 to 200 meters deeper than the public metro system. Here's what makes this impossible to dismiss as Cold War paranoia. The construction timeline predates the Cold War by over a decade. Stalin authorized the secret system before World War II even began. The engineering specifications, according to Bermudez's analysis, called for blast-resistant tunnels capable of withstanding direct nuclear strikes, technology, and threats that wouldn't exist until the atomic age. Urban explorer and author David L. Stern documented unexplained infrastructure in his 2007 book, Moscow Underground. Stern photographed ventilation systems in public metro stations that connect to sealed passages leading deeper underground. Moscow city engineers who spoke anonymously to Stern described maintenance protocols that require security clearances for certain tunnel sections, clearances issued not by the Transportation Ministry, but by the Federal Security Service. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. Metro 2 was a wartime contingency project, a network of bunkers and tunnels designed to protect Soviet leadership during the Great Patriotic War. After the war ended, the system was either abandoned or converted to limited civil defense purposes. The ongoing classification stems from standard national security protocols around government continuity operations, but the construction evidence tells a different story. Electrical consumption records obtained by investigative journalist Andrei Soldatov show power draw consistent with active operations throughout the 1990s and 2000s. In his 2008 book, The New Nobility, Soldatov documented electrical grid anomalies beneath central Moscow that suggest continuous operation of large-scale underground facilities. The power consumption patterns match neither abandoned infrastructure nor minimal maintenance operations. Some researchers suggest Metro 2 evolved into something far more extensive than wartime bunkers. Former Moscow city planner Viktor Kozlov, who worked on subway expansion projects from 1972 to 1989, told the Moscow Times in 2012 that his teams regularly encountered sealed passages during construction. "We were told these were old utility tunnels," Kozlov stated. "But utility tunnels don't require armed guards." The Russian government maintains its position of neither confirming nor denying the system's existence. When pressed by reporters in 2019, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated simply, "The government does not comment on infrastructure related to state security." Yet construction permits filed with Moscow city planning offices between 2015 and 2020 show ongoing, deep infrastructure maintenance projects at coordinates that correspond precisely with Bermudez's mapped tunnel locations. What operation requires a subway system larger than the public metro? Why does a network built in the 1930s still draw enormous amounts of electricity? How do you keep 200 kilometers of tunnels secret in the digital age? What travels these rails that cannot travel the roads above? The dead, it seems, also travel by underground rail, though their destinations remain equally classified. Poveglia Island. The gondolier refuses to take you any closer. You're standing on the dock at Lido, watching the morning mist rise from the Venetian lagoon, and the old man is shaking his head. His weathered hands grip the oar tighter. "Poveglia," he says, and spits into the dark water. The soil is 50% human ash. He points toward the distant island, barely visible through the fog. You can make out the crumbling bell tower, the abandoned buildings. The beaches that locals say turn black when the tide goes out, not from seaweed, from bone fragments ground to powder by 7 centuries of waves. The Italian government has maintained an absolute prohibition on public access to Poveglia Island since 1968, when the last psychiatric facility closed. But the restrictions reach back much further. Historical records from the Venetian Republic document that from 1348 to 1794, over 160,000 plague victims were transported to this 17-acre island. The bodies were burned in massive pyres that burned continuously for months. Dr. Caroline Sturdy-Coles, a forensic archaeologist at Staffordshire University, published her analysis in Conflict Archaeology Review in 2015, confirming that soil samples contain human ash concentrations unprecedented in archaeological sites. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the University of Venice in 2011 revealed bone deposits extending 12 feet below the surface across 60% of the island. From 1864 to 1968, Poveglia served as a mental hospital under the direction of Dr. Paolo Gris, whose treatment records remain sealed in Vatican archives. Former staff members, interviewed by investigative journalist Roberto Gervaso for his 2003 book La Sola Maledetta, described experimental procedures conducted in the hospital's isolation wards. Patient mortality rates, according to declassified health ministry documents, exceeded 70% during Gris's tenure. The hospital's crematorium operated until the facility's closure, processing an estimated 3,000 additional bodies. Here's what makes the continued restriction impossible to justify through standard historical preservation. The island contains no significant architectural heritage. The buildings are 20th century medical facilities. Venice manages dozens of historical islands as tourist destinations. Torcello welcomes visitors despite its ancient cemetery. San Michele functions as an active burial ground with public access. The Lazaretto Nuovo, also a former plague quarantine station, operates as an archaeological park, yet Poveglia remains completely sealed. Italian military patrol boats circle the island on 4-hour rotations. Unauthorized landing attempts result in immediate arrest under Article 268 of the Italian Penal Code, which typically applies to military installations. The mainstream explanation is public safety. The Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage maintains that structural instability in the abandoned hospital buildings creates hazardous conditions. Soil contamination from historical cremation activities poses potential health risks. The island lacks basic infrastructure to support visitors. Standard archaeological procedures require controlled excavation before permitting public access. But the safety concerns don't explain the military-level security. Former Carabinieri officer Marco Torretti, who patrolled the waters around Poveglia from 1995 to 2003, told Il Gazzettino newspaper in 2014 that his unit received orders to prevent not just landing, but close approach. Boats were turned back at a 500-meter perimeter. Photography from the water was discouraged. When the island was briefly offered for private lease in 2014, potential buyers were required to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements before site visits. The lease was withdrawn after 3 months, without explanation. Some researchers suggest the restrictions protect ongoing excavations that have uncovered evidence contradicting official historical narratives about medieval plague management or wartime activities. The Vatican's continued classification of Dr. Griss's patient files adds another dimension to the mystery. Standard medical records become public domain after 75 years. Griss's documentation, however, remains restricted under Vatican secret archives, protocols typically reserved for matters of church doctrine or diplomatic sensitivity. Former archivist Father Giuseppe Cassio, in his 2008 memoir, Custodi del Silenzio, mentioned experimental research conducted under Holy See oversight at several Italian medical facilities during the early 20th century. Poveglia was specifically referenced in documents he was instructed never to catalog. What procedures required such secrecy that they remain classified a century later? Why does an archaeological site require active military protection? What discoveries during recent excavations prompted the withdrawal of private development plans? If the restrictions are purely for safety, why do they intensify rather than diminish over time? The pattern of sealed government facilities extends far beyond historical sites, reaching into the realm of active military installations where the secrets are decidedly modern. The Cheyenne mountain complex. You smell diesel exhaust and hear the rumble of massive generators echoing through tunnels carved from living rock. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows on granite walls that took 3 years of continuous blasting to hollow out. 2,000 feet of solid Colorado mountain sits above your head. The air tastes metallic, recycled through filters designed to scrub out radioactive particles. Somewhere in these corridors, behind blast doors, weighing 25 tons each, military personnel monitor threats that could end civilization. You're standing inside America's most fortified secret, and after nearly 60 years, no one will tell you what really happens here. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex became operational in February 1966, constructed by the United States Air Force at a cost of $142 million. The facility was carved into the granite core of Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs, designed by the architectural firm Parsons Brinckerhoff. Colonel Robert Lukeman oversaw construction, which required the removal of 693,000 tons of granite and the installation of 15 separate buildings mounted on massive steel springs to absorb nuclear shock waves. The declassified specifications reveal a fortress designed to survive a direct hit from a nuclear warhead. The complex features blast doors weighing between 8 and 25 tons, air filtration systems capable of operating in a contaminated environment, and independent power generation from diesel engines and an underground reservoir. The North American Aerospace Defense Command operated from these tunnels for decades, tracking potential missile threats and maintaining what military documents describe as continuity of government operations. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. Cheyenne Mountain represents Cold War military engineering at its peak, a necessary response to the nuclear threat posed by Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles. The facility provided a hardened command center capable of surviving an atomic first strike and coordinating America's nuclear response. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the complex transitioned to monitoring space debris, missile defense, and other aerospace defense missions. But the classification levels reveal something more complex. After 57 years of operation, vast sections of the facility remain classified at levels beyond top secret. Documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests arrive so heavily redacted they resemble abstract art. Former personnel who worked in the deepest levels are bound by secrecy agreements that extend decades beyond their retirement. The facility's current operational capacity remains unknown, with personnel numbers, mission scope, and technological capabilities all classified. The mountain itself has become a black hole of information. Seismic monitoring stations detect regular underground activity that doesn't match construction or maintenance patterns. Power consumption records, obtained through utility company filings, show energy usage far exceeding what the acknowledged operations would require. The facility's defensive capabilities were designed for threats from the 1960s, yet modernization contracts worth billions of dollars continue to flow into the mountain with no public accounting of their purpose. Some researchers suggest the complex serves functions that extend far beyond missile defense. The facility's isolation, its hardened construction, and its massive size could accommodate research projects, storage operations, or command functions that require absolute secrecy. The classification of routine maintenance records and personnel assignments indicates operational security measures typically associated with active intelligence programs rather than purely defensive installations. The granite walls that promise protection from nuclear annihilation now guard secrets from the American people who funded their construction. Congressional oversight committees receive classified briefings about the facility's activities, but their findings never reach public record. The mountain that was built to preserve American democracy has become a symbol of how national security can consume the transparency it was designed to protect. What kind of operations require this level of secrecy after nearly 6 decades? Why do routine administrative functions remain classified at the highest levels? What threats or missions justify the continued expansion of a facility designed for a war that never came? How many other mountains hide similar complexes that we haven't found? While Colorado's granite conceals America's deepest military secrets, the Australian desert guards its own forbidden territory with equal determination. Woomera prohibited area. You pull your vehicle to the edge of the sealed road. The sign stands 12 feet high against the endless red expanse. Prohibited area. Defense weapons testing range. Entry forbidden. Trespassers prosecuted. Beyond the razor wire fence, 48,000 square miles of South Australian desert stretch to every horizon. No roads, no buildings, no life visible anywhere. Just the largest restricted military zone on Earth, locked away since 1947. You realize you're staring at an area larger than England that hasn't been seen by civilian eyes for over 75 years. The Australian Defence Force established the Woomera rocket range on April 19, 1947, following a joint agreement between Britain and Australia, documented in the Anglo-Australian Joint Project. The initial surveys, conducted by Royal Australian Air Force Wing Commander Leonard Lahal and British Ministry of Supply officials, mapped an exclusion zone covering 127,000 square kilometers of desert between Adelaide and Alice Springs. The facility's official designation remained Long-Range Weapons Establishment until 1980, when operational control transferred to the Defense Science and Technology Organization under Director Frank Ferentz. Between 1949 and 1980, official records document over 4,000 rocket and missile tests within the prohibited zone. The Blue Streak Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile Program alone conducted 48 successful launches between 1964 and 1971, according to declassified British Ministry of Defense files released in 2005. Defense contractors BAE Systems and Lockheed Martin have maintained continuous operations at the facility under classified agreements extending through 2047, but here's what makes this impossible. No government maintains the world's largest prohibited zone for 77 years to test conventional weapons. The operational costs exceed $200 million annually just for perimeter security and exclusion enforcement, according to Australian Defence Force budget allocations filed in Parliament between 2018 and 2022. Modern weapons testing requires months, not decades. The United States conducts similar tests at Nevada Test Site, using only 3,000 square miles. Russia's Kapustin Yar covers 800 square miles. China's Jiuquan facility spans 2,000 square miles. The mainstream explanation is that Woomera serves as Australia's primary rocket launch facility and weapons testing range, supporting both domestic defense programs and international space missions. The European Space Agency has conducted satellite launches from Woomera since 2003. The facility provides crucial testing capabilities for hypersonic weapons development and serves as a strategic asset for allied nations conducting classified defense research. But the mathematics doesn't support this explanation. Declassified flight manifests show only 37 documented launches between 2000 and 2023. The The Space Shuttle program managed 135 missions, using Kennedy Space Center's 56 square miles. Baikonur Cosmodrome launches 60 rockets annually from 2,700 square miles. Woomera's 48,000 square miles could accommodate every rocket launch in human history, with room for 10,000 more facilities. The silence extends beyond the perimeter. Aboriginal traditional owners of the land, including the Kokatha and Wirangu peoples, signed agreements in 1948 relinquishing access to ancestral territories within the prohibited zone. Elder Tommy Warrior of the Kokatha Nation stated in 2012 testimony to the South Australian Parliament, "Our grandfathers' sacred sites are in there. We haven't seen them for 65 years. The government won't even tell us if they still exist." Freedom of Information requests filed by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in 2019 seeking basic environmental impact data were rejected under Section 33 of the Freedom of Information Act, citing national security exemptions. Satellite imagery analysis conducted by the Federation of American Scientists in 2021 identified over 200 structures within the prohibited zone that don't match any known weapons testing configuration. Dr. Hans Christensen, director of the Nuclear Information Project, published findings in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists documenting underground facilities extending across 17 separate locations within the range. The Australian government has never acknowledged these installations exist. What requires 48,000 square miles of absolute secrecy? Why maintain the world's largest prohibited zone for basic rocket testing? What lies beneath those 17 underground installations that satellite analysis detected? Why haven't the traditional owners been allowed to visit their ancestral sites for 77 years? What kind of weapons testing demands 3/4 of a century of total isolation? China's emperors understood that the greatest secrets require the deepest burial, constructing elaborate mausoleums that would hide their contents for millennia. The Jiangsu mausoleum complex. You feel the weight of 2 millennia pressing down through the earth beneath your feet. The hills rise in perfect geometric formation across the Jiangsu countryside. 13 burial mounds arranged in a pattern that mirrors the constellations above. Your ground-penetrating radar equipment sends pulses deep into the soil, and what bounces back defies every assumption about ancient burial practices. The mercury readings spike beyond anything naturally occurring. The structural scans reveal chambers within chambers, a labyrinth of passages that shouldn't exist. And somewhere beneath the largest mound lies Emperor Gaozu, first ruler of the Western Han Dynasty, sealed away for over 2,000 years in a tomb that Chinese authorities refused to open. The complex was first documented by imperial historians during the Eastern Han period, around 125 Common Era, though the tombs themselves date to the founding of the Western Han Dynasty in 206 before the Common Era. Dr. Chen Mingshan of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences published his comprehensive survey in archaeological investigations of Han imperial tombs in 1997, mapping 13 distinct burial mounds across 47 square kilometers of protected territory. His team's magnetometry revealed underground structures extending 300 meters in every direction from each central chamber. Ground-penetrating radar conducted by Dr. Wang Xiping's team from Beijing University in 2003 detected mercury concentrations of up to 100 parts per million in the soil above the imperial chambers, levels that would be lethal to human exposure. The ancient records of the Grand Historian, compiled by Sima Qian around 100 before the Common Era, describe the tomb's construction with disturbing specificity. Flowing rivers of mercury were installed to represent the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers. Crossbows were rigged to fire automatically at intruders. Precious stones studded the ceiling to mirror the night sky. The tomb was sealed with molten copper, and anyone who knew its location was executed to preserve the secret. These accounts were dismissed as imperial propaganda until modern scanning technology confirmed their accuracy. Chinese authorities maintained the complex under perpetual archaeological protection status, restricting all access except for remote sensing surveys. No excavation has been permitted since the site's initial documentation. Official statements cite concerns about preserving the structural integrity of the chambers and protecting researchers from potentially hazardous materials. The State Administration of Cultural Heritage has classified all detailed survey data above the level of basic structural mapping. Dr. Chen's original research team was reassigned to other projects after requesting permission to drill core samples in 2004. The mainstream explanation emphasizes conservation principles and the complexity of excavating a site with such elaborate preservation systems. The mercury concentrations, while unusual, represent an intentional preservation method designed to prevent decay and deter grave robbers. The sealed chambers contain archaeological treasures of immense historical value that require careful planning before any intervention. The restricted access protects both the site's integrity and researchers' safety, while allowing time to develop appropriate excavation techniques. The Chinese government's cautious approach reflects responsible stewardship of an irreplaceable cultural resource. But the radar data reveals structures that extend far beyond what any ancient tomb should contain. Dr. Wang's surveys identify chambers positioned at mathematically precise intervals that correspond to no known burial traditions from the Han period. The mercury concentrations follow patterns that suggest active circulation systems still functioning after more than 2,000 years. Independent analysis of soil samples taken from the site's periphery by Dr. Sarah Mitchell of Cambridge University in 2008 detected isotopic signatures inconsistent with naturally occurring mercury deposits. Her findings, published in Geochemical Anomalies in Chinese imperial sites, indicate the presence of refined mercury compounds using techniques that shouldn't have existed in ancient China. Most disturbing are the structural scans that show movement within the sealed chambers. Seismic monitoring equipment installed around the perimeter has recorded regular vibrations emanating from the underground complex. The patterns are too consistent to be geological and too complex to be explained by settling structures. Dr. Liu Xiaowei of the Chinese Seismological Bureau documented these readings in his classified report to the State Council in 2012, noting that the vibration signatures match no known geological phenomena. Some researchers suggest the complex represents a level of engineering sophistication that challenges conventional understanding of Han Dynasty capabilities. The precision of the mercury circulation systems, the mathematical relationships between chamber positions, and the apparent functionality of ancient preservation mechanisms indicate technological knowledge that exceeds what historical records attribute to the period. Others propose that the site contains materials or artifacts that modern authorities consider too sensitive for public disclosure. What technology could create mercury circulation systems that function for over 2,000 years? Why do seismic sensors detect movement within chambers sealed since ancient times? What structural discoveries could justify maintaining absolute secrecy for multiple decades of archaeological advancement? Who decided that some knowledge buried in ancient China must remain buried forever? The answers lie 300 meters beneath 13 hills that Chinese authorities will never allow anyone to explore. These 10 sites represent more than individual mysteries scattered across the globe and through time. 10 locations, 10 walls built by those who hold power. Each one tells the same story in a different language, that there are things governments believe you are not ready to know. From the Vatican's locked archives to China's sealed emperor, from Australia's forbidden desert to Italy's quarantined island, the pattern emerges with uncomfortable clarity. Power doesn't just govern the living, it governs knowledge itself. It decides which histories can be told, which technologies can be shared, which truths can surface. The classification stamps and warning signs and armed guards are just the surface symptoms of something far more profound, the recognition that information, like uranium, can be weaponized by its mere existence. Every sealed door represents a choice made by someone who decided that ignorance, not knowledge, serves the greater good. But here's what should keep you awake at night. These aren't ancient mysteries locked away by dead pharaohs. These are active decisions made by living bureaucrats, renewed every day, justified in committee rooms where men in suits weigh your right to know against their definition of stability. the Vatican archivist who decides which medieval documents stay buried, the Chinese official who maintains the cordon around the first emperor's tomb, the Brazilian general who keeps Snake Island forbidden, the American colonel who changes the access codes to Cheyenne Mountain. Right now, today, people are choosing what version of reality you get to live in. The most unsettling possibility isn't that these sites hide alien technology or ancient weapons or revolutionary energy sources. It's that they hide something simpler and more dangerous, the recognition that civilization is far more fragile than we pretend, that our institutions depend on carefully maintained ignorance, and that some truths would unravel not just governments, but the basic agreements that hold society together. The locked doors don't just protect secrets. They protect the illusion that we live in a world where all the important questions have safe answers. What happens when we realize that safety itself might be the lie we've been told to keep us from asking the questions that matter most?